Happy International Women's Day, everybody. I'm Felicia Willow. I'm the Interim Chief Executive here at the Fawcett Society. Just to have a bit of an introduction, you will be able to submit panels questions through the Q&A function. This is going to be asked to the panelists towards the end of the event in the second half. You're getting some information through in the Q&A now from one of our team members. I'd just like to remind everybody to keep the questions in the Q&A respectful. Our team will be moderating the questions before they come through. Also, we'd really love it if you took this celebration over to social media. We are using the hashtag #MakeWomenVisible, and our handle is @FawcettSociety if you'd like to tag us as well. So today is International Women's Day, and we wanted to bring this panel together to demonstrate the breadth and strength of women's leadership. I'm personally really, really excited about this panel. I can't believe I have a job where I get to meet women like this. So it's a really exciting evening for me, and I hope everybody is going to enjoy it. So I'm just going to quickly introduce everybody, and then we'll move into the questions. The first member of our panel is Maria Miller, the Conservative MP for Basingstoke. Maria was first elected to represent Basingstoke in the 2005 general election. Before entering Parliament, Maria worked for 20 years in marketing, including board-level experience. Maria's held a range of roles in Parliament and government, including Shadow Minister for Education, Shadow Minister for Family Welfare, Shadow Minister for Family, then becoming the Minister for Disabled People, Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, and Minister for Women and Equalities. In June 2015, Maria was elected as chair of the newly established Women and Equalities Select Committee, and Maria was nominated for the position by MPs across the House in 2017 and was re-elected unopposed. In addition to her role as chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Women in Parliament, Maria is co-chair of the APPG UN Women and chair of Conservative Women in Parliament. So thank you so much, Maria, for being with us this evening. The second panelist we have tonight is Dame Heather Rabbatts. Heather's career spans law, government, sport and media. She's currently chair of specialist sports agency Vero Communications and has recently established the Women's Sports Group, a new venture designed to create opportunities to promote, enhance and empower women's sport. Heather also chairs the board of Soho Theatre and until recently was MD of film and TV production company Cove Pictures. In 2018, Heather became chair of Time's Up UK and in 2019 joined Time's Up's global board. Born out of the revelations of Me Too, Time's Up advocates to end sexual harassment, change representation and pay parity to achieve long-term cultural change. Heather began her career as a lawyer, then a government advisor, and was the youngest CEO of a local authority. She was the first woman and person of colour on the board of the English FA in 150 years, served on the boards of the BBC, the Bank of England, the Foreign Office and the Royal Opera House, and commissioned award-winning content as a senior executive at Channel 4 Television. Thank you so much, Heather. I can't imagine doing a 2-page CV for your experience. It's incredible. Next up, we have Dr. Hannah Barron-Brown, the Deputy Leader of the Women's Equality Party and also GP trainee. So Hannah is a GP trainee in Yorkshire, council member of the British Medical Association and deputy leader of the Women's Equality Party with the portfolio for Making Change Happen. Alongside her clinical and political work, she travels the UK giving talks about diversity and disability in venues from the House of Lords to international publishing companies. Sorry, that's the way she does the talk, sorry. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and works to support disabled people in politics, employment, travel, health and education. Hannah is an ambassador of the disability charity My AFK and gynecological cancer charity The Eve Appeal, as well as a role model for the Lightyear Foundation, and has given 2 TEDx talks on the need for diversity in the NHS and being a role model. She also co-hosts the Salty Women podcast with Olivia-nominated playwright and activist Athena Stevens. I watched one of the TED Talks the other day and it's amazing. So if people haven't checked it out, you should definitely go on and have a look. It's really good. So thank you, Hannah, for being with us. Really appreciate it. And last but definitely not least, we have Claire Cohen, the women's editor and features at The Telegraph. Claire is an editor and columnist on The Telegraph. She heads up the Telegraph Women Online, is associate features editor on the newspaper and a regular commentator on TV and radio. She also writes a weekly newsletter, The 51%. So thank you so much, Claire, for being with us tonight. Really, really appreciate it. So I do honestly feel really honored to be standing alongside everybody here via Zoom. and to give them the opportunity to ask you questions about how you've become leaders in your field and your views for the future. This year, I think, we are trying to celebrate International Women's Day, but it has been quite a year when we look back. So before we begin, I wanted to share a few thoughts on the year that we've had. It's been a very difficult year for everyone. We're coming up on the first anniversary of the start of the pandemic lockdown in the UK. It was almost exactly a year ago that we entered our first lockdown. Fawcett has been campaigning throughout this period to make women's experiences in all their diversity visible during the coronavirus. That's why we have our Make Women Visible campaign. And we've also been calling for more women and the government crisis decision-making table at the same time. We can't help but connect the lack of women at the government's crisis decision-making table and a pandemic policy response that has essentially exacerbated gender inequality, according to the recent cross-party report by the Women and Equality Select Committee. We need more women in power, and we need more diverse women in power. So some of the statistics that have come up through Fawcett's work include things like 34% of our MPs are women, but just 6% of our MPs are women of colour. Fawcett's research found 35% of councillors in England are women, and just 5% of local councillors are thought to be women of colour. Women with disabilities continue to be significantly underrepresented, with fewer than 1% of women MPs in Parliament identifying as disabled people. There are currently 50 MPs who identify as LGBTQ+ in the House of Commons, and of these, 8 are women. From the business world, 6% of CEOs of FTSE 100 companies are women, and 27% of charity CEOs. 21% of newspaper editors are women. The University of Southampton analysed 54 coronavirus briefings and found that 24 out of them, that's 44%, did not include a single woman expert. And meanwhile, Fawcett research is showing that women are being hit hardest by the social and economic impact of the virus. So we know there's a lot to work on, but we also know the barriers the barriers to women holding positions of power are extensive. From the targeting and abuse of women to a lack of flexibility built into positions, women have had to fight harder to get their voices heard. And so we're seeing some voices being heard, and we're seeing the outstanding impact that some women are having already. And today we really wanted to celebrate the women on this panel who are having their voices heard and are making a difference. So I'd like to get started with some questions. I'll stop talking now. And I'd like to ask Maria, we work with a lot of women who are interested in having a political career. Can you tell us about your journey to becoming an MP?
Well, like everybody, my story is different, but like many women, I was asked to stand for election by somebody else, because it would have never occurred to me that somebody who was born in a council house, went to their local comprehensive school, didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, could become a Tory MP. So it was a friend of mine who put my name forward, and I was elected in 2005 when we only had 17 women in the Conservative Party. And another shocking fact for you, there are only 65 women who were elected to be Conservative MPs before I took my seat in the House of Commons. So a journey of somebody who didn't think that women like me became MPs, and I think that's the challenge, isn't it? To get us to remove our own stereotypes of what an MP looks like. And every single person in this country can consider becoming an MP. There shouldn't be a stereotype there, regardless of whether you're female, not, or have any other protected characteristics. This should be something that's open to everybody.
I mean, one of the things we see is that it feels like there's 2 challenges to becoming an MP or a politician. The first is, as you say, attracting these women who might not think that this is something for them, might not see this as something, but also, the challenges within Parliament. And so as chair of the all-party parliamentary group, I always get tongue-tied on that one, of women in Parliament and the Conservative Women in Parliament group, what challenges do you see from where you sit about what women in Parliament face?
Well, it's clear that when women get to Parliament, they don't stay as long as parliamentarians as men do. The data bears that out. So we have to look very carefully about what it is that is deterring women from coming into Parliament and put it right. And in fact, that's my pledge that I've just made in a meeting that I've had with Commonwealth women parliamentarians from around the world. And I think primarily, It is about the way in which Parliament is run. It hasn't modernised enough to be able to attract women and retain women. But also I'm deeply concerned about the impact of online abuse on women parliamentarians who disproportionately suffer from it. And it can not only deter women from wanting to stand in the first place, but it can shorten their political careers. So we're now starting to measure some of these things in Parliament so that action can be taken. And I think I want to send out a very positive message today that these things shouldn't deter women from coming forward, because we are taking action and we want to make sure that these sorts of barriers that people can really be concerned about should not be stopping women from seeking election.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to move on to Heather now. Heather, your impressive career tracks law, government, media and sports. You were clearly driven and ambitious from a young age. Can you tell us, where do you think that drive came from, and what support do you think young women of today need to become the leaders of the future?
I think the support I was given as a young mixed race girl in areas fundamentally from my mum and dad into but they me a belief that if I worked hard I could achieve what I wanted to do. And I didn't have any plan, as you can see from my career CV. I've never had a plan, but I wasn't going to be condemned by a system at that point, a school system that said to me I was never going to amount to very much. And I suppose I was driven in a way on by both that message and great parental encouragement. And whilst I left school at 16 and came to London and worked, I found myself in education, and then went to become a barrister. And I think the education is absolutely key in terms of opportunity for young women. Whenever I've given prizes at school days, gosh, we look forward to those moments coming back. It has always been about encouraging young women and young women of colour and women with disabilities to say, actually, if I want to do things, I can, and I can aspire to roles that may be considered male, but I'll no longer and should no longer be the preserve of men. And that's why I think having role models is so important around why women speaking out about what they've been doing and what they've achieved really helps to break down those assumptions that whether it's becoming an MP, as Maria has just said, is not for me. I was told many times for me, and I refuse to be defined by other people's expectations of myself. And I think that's what I would try and say to young women. You make you define what you want to do and you go for it.
Great, thanks. I mean, obviously you've had a lot of experience in many different sectors, so you must have a really interesting perspective about what's going on with coronavirus. So it's obviously been a difficult time for businesses and employers. What kind of vital work do you think there's a risk that the vital work being done around workplace equality and diversity might be forgotten about with all of this going on? And what kind of things do you think we should do to make sure that we don't see that slip back?
Yeah, no, I think there's a real danger that some of the gains that we were seeing could be pushed back, because clearly we are facing a scale of market challenge and economic challenge that we've never witnessed before. And therefore there is danger that, the issues around women's equity may push further down employers' priorities. What I hope is that the work that's underway at the moment, work that you do as the Fawcett Society, or obviously Maria's doing as part of her all-party work on women's equality, but also many other voices and advocates, whether that's Time's Up or indeed others, are really trying to ensure that organisations come back and prioritise having an inclusive culture, a culture that's respectful, that treats people with dignity, because actually those are the keys to being successful. We know the more diverse you are, the more you are likely to be a company that is successful. You have this much broader canvas that you are drawing on all the time to make more effective decisions. And that research has been done over and over again. So for many leaders of businesses who are enlightened, I think they will be saying, how do we build back a culture in our workplaces as people come back that absolutely has inclusion built in at its heart, because that is the best pathway to market and economic success.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those interesting things that sometimes people act as if diversity and inclusion is a box to tick or a good thing to do, rather than just something that is also really essential for economic success. So that's, all really, really important. Thank you, Heather. Hannah, you've also got a really interesting span of work that you've done, spanning medicine as both a nurse and a doctor, and also politics and campaigning for disabled rights. Lots of things going on there. How do you find, your work in medicine supports your work as a deputy leader of the Women's Equality Party? And what kind of led you to bringing political work into your career?
Gosh, big questions. So I think, as a GP in politics, you see literally everything as a GP. It's not just what we consider health. I regularly work with women who are living through domestic abuse, or I see, the huge health inequalities we have in our society laid out before me every single day, and the bigger social implications of those. I've had patients sit there going, I don't know which drug I need to take most of because I can only afford one of them. And, we deal with these challenges every single day. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was working in a care home. And I was seeing, when we were unable to get enough PPE, and I had colleagues who were older women from a range of different ethnic minorities who were saying, I don't know whether it's safe for me to come to work. How do I come in and care for people and then risk taking this back to my family? How do I protect them? The huge implications of that, and the huge amount of effort and bravery that's been shown by our care workers over the last year, that's really kind of empowered a lot of the work we're doing as a political party about looking at the fact that care workers aren't paid a real living wage at the moment. And so I think, everything I do in my GP work has reflections in my political career. I took a bit of a scenic route in. I originally got involved with the British Medical Association during the junior doctors contract dispute, and wasn't expecting to end up becoming a trade unionist, but lo and behold, I did. Then I was invited to the Women's Equality Party conference to speak about women's health inequalities, because the BMA had done a big report into that. And by the end of the day, I joined the party, and within 6 months, I was a European parliamentary candidate, a local council candidate. But fundamentally, everything I've done politically has been because I've had other women behind me going, of course you can do that. And if you're not sure whether you can do that, what can we put in place to support you? And acknowledging that, yeah, I might do things differently, but actually my lived experience as a disabled person, as a queer woman, as somebody who has spent, 10 years working in the NHS now in a variety of different roles, is actually vitally important to the challenges we face as a wider society now.
Fantastic. Big question, but a good answer. Also, we know, when I was talking about the statistics earlier on, we know that currently fewer than 1% of women MPs in Parliament identify as being disabled. Do you have any thoughts about what we could be doing right now to get more disabled women and people into every level of politics and to have their voices and talents better represented? I
mean, I could write a PhD on this. There's so much we need to do. And I'm very careful with the use of the word need there, because frankly, 1% is really upsetting, actually. It really upsets me that I am not really represented. That's horrific. So we need to be able to job share across politics. That's a really basic thing. I work clinically 4 days a week because I know that physically it's not something I can do full time. That should be reflected in all different types of politicians. We need to start right at grassroots level as well, though. So things like the very language we use. It's all, I'm running for this and I'm standing for that. Well, that's jolly good. I don't do either of those things. So where do I fit in there? We need to look at things like canvassing, leafleting, how we work, and how we use, the lessons we've learned through this pandemic about working digitally, doing more stuff on Zoom, using things like social media, how we can bring those skills in. I think fundamentally, there is very little that as a disabled woman I cannot do, but the chances are I'm going to want to do them differently. And, you know, you've seen my TED Talk. This is literally my TED Talk. But I think it's about reflecting that as a disabled person, I bring a whole load of extra lived experience. And if you want a problem solver or a team worker, you get a disabled person. Because if I can navigate across a tube system where only a quarter of the stations are accessible to me, you bet I can find solutions to loads of other problems too, because it is bred into me as a disabled person that that's what I have to do in a society that's designed without me even being remembered. So I think there's loads of things we can do to bring more women into politics when they have disabilities. But also there's loads of things we need to do, and we need to do it quickly because the situation at the moment is frankly untenable and really quite unfair.
Great, thank you. And again, not last but not least, Claire. So, you know, how issues are discussed in the media around, you know, women's issues and women's rights, equality, and how people understand that in the general community. Obviously, you know, from where Fawcett's sitting, that's really, really essential to getting messages out there and to making change happen. So how, you know, can you tell us a bit about how you became women's editor for the Telegraph Online and kind of your journey to reaching that point?
Sure. Well, I've been at the Telegraph 10 years this year, which is more shocking to me than anyone. And, you know, I came from a newspaper background. I'd worked for other papers that were very male dominated, and I was working in almost all male teams. And then I joined the Telegraph, and a few months after I joined, Emma Barnett, who most of you I'm sure have heard of, launched Telegraph Women Online, and I was just absolutely blown away by it. It was somewhere that the conversations that were really starting to happen between women on social media were actually being, you know, collected and raised and discussed, and that was the first time I'd seen anything like that on a national newspaper website. And so I wanted to get involved, so I started writing, and then in 2014 I became deputy editor, and then in 2016 I became editor. And I guess those early lessons are really fundamental to how I run the section, actually. That kind of initial idea of all those different voices that just hadn't been amplified before is something I really think about often when I'm editing for the section, even today. And I'm really lucky, I suppose is the word, to have just been really supported and given the space to do that, actually, and to launch campaigns. We've done a lot of campaigning, and that's something that the section is really proud of. Most notably, I guess, our Women in Business campaign, which we launched on International Women's Day two years ago. And that's all about the funding gap for female entrepreneurs. And that sort of inspired a government review into the issue, and the Investing in Women Code that now encourages financial institutions to be accountable for how much money they give to female entrepreneurs. So something like that is incredibly rewarding when you feel like you've actually had an impact, a tangible impact. And during lockdown, I mean, you mentioned in your introduction that it's been a really hard year for so many women, as we know. So last summer, we launched our Equality Check campaign, which was just designed to shine light on all those things that were happening, and all the ways that women weren't being listened to or considered in the making of lockdown policy. Which is a hugely wide-ranging topic, as we all know, but you know, we've been trying so hard to shine a light on all of those things. We did a big survey on it today, which I won't bore you with loads of statistics, but which essentially showed that working mothers, as I think we all know, have been really hard hit and are flipping exhausted and burnt out and feeling fed up of being thought of as the default parent, I guess, when it comes to domestic duties and to childcare. So everything we do is so wide-ranging and lots of campaigning. Yeah, I guess that's a very long-winded way of saying how I got into it.
I did think it was quite interesting that International Women's Day this year fell on the day that most children were going back to school. It kind of felt, is that just an error, or did that actually happen on purpose? It was I've got two small children, so it was a very strange feeling today, having them at school all day and being able to sit at my desk all day. It was amazing. So we've talked about kind of, you know, the work that you do facing outwards, Claire, but, you know, also what about within journalism? You know, we've talked within other panelists about some of these barriers about, you know, getting into politics and moving up, you know, in terms of journalism. What is it like for women entering journalism, and are there barriers there to you know, women succeeding and going into leadership positions?
There are. I mean, there are similar barriers to many of the different industries we're talking about. I mean, I think you mentioned in your intro that only 21% of newspaper editors are women, which, seeing as the first female editor of a national newspaper was in the mid-80s, doesn't necessarily seem like a huge amount of progress. Then again, I was reading a story over the weekend about a woman who had applied for a senior job in journalism about a decade ago, and had been told that she was being rejected for the job because she'd just got married and she'd soon be spitting out babies. And I just thought, you know what, actually, we have come a long way, because there's no way anything like that would ever happen now. Even in the last few years, you know, when I started in the industry, I was frequently the only woman in a meeting. And the thought of that now is so far-fetched. But equally, like lots of workplaces and lots of industries, while there are lots of women coming into the workplace and at entry level, it's absolutely fantastic now. It's keeping those women and promoting them into senior leadership positions and making sure they're going up that pipeline that we still struggle with. You know, I have to say, luckily, here at the Telegraph, and actually lots of other national newspapers now, the maternity leave packages and paternity are really good. But it's the flexible working thing. I mean, journalism is, you know, it's a hard-nosed industry. The hours are long. And if you're on deadline, there's very little flexibility that can be had there. So that, I think, is going to be a big problem to overcome, particularly after this period where we have all had this working from home trial. It's actually whether we can harness some of the benefits. This is, you know, true for many other workplaces too. And really push women up that pipeline and get that 21% much higher.
Yeah, I've actually been reading Jolie Briley's book that came out, you know, the Pregnant Then Screwed book. I'm about halfway through it because I have to put it down now and then because it makes me so cross and I identify way too much with so much of it. It's extraordinary how much all of that is still going on, and so, you know, good to hear that it sounds more positive in journalism. But yeah, definitely worth reading for anyone who hasn't picked that one up yet. So I'll come back to Maria, if that's all right. So, you know, we're talking about coronavirus and some of the decisions that are being made. What do you think needs to change to get more women at the government's coronavirus decision-making table?
Well, I think the truth is that there are women there behind the scenes. The problem is they're not in front of the camera. So I think I would start with my answer to say that there are women's voices there, and the women involved are pretty feisty and strong. People like Therese Coffey, who herself is a scientist with an amazing background running our Department for Work and Pensions, which has been crucial. And perhaps that's the reason why the furloughing scheme, although obviously it would be better if it wasn't there, it is actually supporting many thousands of women who have found themselves, they could have been made unemployed if that wasn't there. So, you know, people like Therese Coffey, people like Nadine Dorries in the Department for Health, and so many other women who are working behind the scenes. I think the real challenge for the government is why they haven't been more visible. And that challenge, I know, has landed very squarely in the laps of number 10, and they're looking for ways to try and address it. And the real reason, as many people on this call will understand, is unless you get women into some of those leadership positions across the board, then they aren't going to get the visibility. And that's not just a problem in government, it's a problem in many other companies as well. It's not good enough to have women having less visible roles. They've got to be in the most visible roles. But certainly I want to see far more women taking leadership positions, not just in government, but across the spectrum in the civil service as well.
Absolutely. I know there's some concern that, you know, we know that more women have taken furlough than men have over the course of the pandemic. I think at the very beginning there were slightly more men, and it's been women quite a lot ever since. And there's fears that that's going to translate into higher levels of redundancy. I know Fawcett's been calling for employers to have to report sex disaggregated redundancy data, because that's something that we're worried about. Is that kind of what happens next question? So yeah. Sorry, I'm just having a battery problem. I will ask Heather a question and then deal with my battery. So Heather, you were the first woman and the first woman of colour to serve on the Football Association's board, and you were also executive deputy chair of Millwall Football Club. Do you think the sport's changing for women, and if so, how do you see that?
I think sport is changing it's still changing slowly. And certainly in the world of football, you know, we still see very few women and women of colour in senior leadership roles across the ecology of football, or indeed other sport, in terms of being senior at club level or at regulatory level. It's beginning to shift, and there's been, the FA's recently developed a diversity code that, you know, I was working on when I was there, and my successor Paul Elliott has taken up. I think there's a recognition that, in particular in regards to race, this has to be grappled with in the wake of Black Lives Matter, and Black Power is increasingly talking about the fact that they don't really see anybody like them in seats of power, or indeed in the dugout. So I think there is a growing recognition that sport has to lean into this issue and address it. I think in women's sports themselves, so women's football or women's cricket or women's rugby, we were seeing prior to the pandemic huge growth in their markets, in their attendance. The Women's World Cup and in Paris was watched by over 1 billion people. And what I'm working on as part of one of my roles in the company I run is to try and ensure that the profile for women's sport, but more importantly, the value from their media rights, are enhanced and driven so that they can be invested back into women's sports. So, you know, there is definitely a huge amount going on. People are addressing their governance boards, you know, whether it's in rugby or cricket. There are different protocols put in place. They are an attempt to try and drive up more equitable recruitment. But we still have some distance to go. Sport's not alone, as you mentioned. We still have, you know, significant underrepresentation of women as chief execs in the top FTSE companies. So we know that we must try and, you know, push for this greater representation. And that requires everybody working together. And nobody's going to be able to do that by themselves. So that's why bringing partners and stakeholders to think about how we can shape the broader ecology to push representation and equity is so important.
I've just had a message and I'm the worst offender of this, but if we could all slow down a little bit with talking, and we've got some live captions going for the audience. So I've just had a message that that we're all talking too fast, and it's I don't know if that was actually aimed specifically at me because I'm speak really fast, but I like to pretend that, you know, it was the whole panel. So I'll just pass that
We're
on.
all guilty.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's really fascinating, and it sounds like a challenge that you're grappling with, and the industry is grappling with, which is, you know, half the battle, isn't it, is to recognize that there's an issue there that we need to deal with. So Hannah, back to you again. One of the things we've spoken about is this issue of online abuse of women. You know, the work that we do with our Equal Power project, it's been something that has been raised repeatedly as one of the barriers to women getting into politics. I know Miria was just talking about it as well in terms of affecting women staying in politics. Now, I've just spoken really fast again, haven't I? I will slow down. Sorry, I'm Australian. We speak fast in Australia. So you've built a successful social media following. And how do you find, you know, that you balance your voice, you know, using your voice online with looking out for your own well-being and, you know, dealing with some of these things that are such a problem?
So I'm now going to try and remind myself to talk slowly. So I think it's really important that this is something that we address and that we talk openly about, because I know as a party, we're currently running digital activist training for all of our wonderful members and supporters. And one of the biggest challenges that women have when they come to this training, and I run these sessions, is they say, you know, what about trolls? What about trolling? What about abuse? How do you manage that? And it puts women off. And we know that it's such an important element of campaigning, particularly in an election where we can't really canvass, where leafleting isn't really happening. I mean, let's not think about the fact that digital exclusion disproportionately affects women, who are then going to potentially not vote as much as men would. There are loads of issues around electioning and not feeling you can use social media safely. I spend an inordinate amount of my time on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And yeah, it can be quite a scary space, particularly as a woman, you know, with a disability who has something that people can pick on, that trolls really like it when they can find something about you to just target. And with me, it's the fact my legs don't really work. But I think the way I've managed it is that I've always been very clear that this is my space. Anything I want to, not my space, but my space. But anything I put out there is intrinsically me. It's not the party's channel. It's not anyone else's channel. It's my place. And if I don't feel safe, if I feel abused, people get muted, people get blocked, people get reported. And I have a very low threshold for doing that. I don't want to live in a social media echo chamber. And there is a bit of a fine line there, I think. I'm always happy to engage in constructive discussion because I think that's important. But I think we have to learn how to keep ourselves and each other safe. And actually, you can create a really lovely space. Social media, particularly for the disabled community, is a lifeline because it's so hard for us, even pre-pandemic, to meet each other often and to be able to get to know each other and share experiences. And it's hugely important. And I have an incredible network of disabled people and women that I would never, ever want to lose on there. So I think it's about finding your people, finding your networks, and being quite disciplined about saying, no, this is what I'm not going to tolerate. This is what I will engage with. But fundamentally, this is mine. And the second I'm not happy, I feel comfortable stepping away. Having those boundaries is important, but I long for the day when they're no longer needed.
Absolutely. I only joined Twitter towards the end of last year, and it's been quite an interesting experience. It is, you know, I was very happy in my LinkedIn land, and then coming into Twitter was like, oh, this is different. And you're right, there can be really wonderful things in there, but also quite a lot of things I don't think people would say to your face. So, Claire. So do you think women's representation in journalism has affected how women's experiences and the impact of coronavirus on women has been portrayed in the news?
Short answer, yes. I really do. I think
that's a bad question, wasn't it? If you can answer with a yes. You can see
Yeah.
I'm not a journalist. How has?
Just as I think Maria was discussing with you, you know, how women's representation visibly in the cabinet at the top, in the top table and on stage has affected women's experiences in lockdown. I think absolutely. I think, you know, whatever industry you work in, change happens from within, doesn't it? And the more women there are in senior roles at newspapers, the more that is reflected in the paper, on the website, and how women are discussed and seen and used as tools to discuss stories as well. Actually, I think there has been a lot of positive noise made about what is a negative story about how women have been impacted by the pandemic. No, I'm proud that we were among the first to have one of those conversations with our campaign last year, but lots and lots of people are having this conversation, and studies that come out from the Forces Society, from UN Women saying the clock is being turned back 25 years, those things aren't being thrown away or buried away, you know, they're making big headlines. So that for me is one positive, I suppose, and not just by women's editors or by Women's Hour or publications aimed specifically at women, you know, on the main news pages, on the main leader pages, opinion pages, on the TV and the radio. I mean, it's great that programs like Newsnight have a women, you know, female editor now, and Radio 4 Today program's got a female editor. So those stories are really being pushed. I don't think necessarily the problem has been with the noise that's been made about it. It's getting the right people to listen to the noise that's been made, I think, has been the issue so far.
So now I've got a question, the same question for everybody. So we'll whip around. You know, we've got a good few hundred people listening here today to all of your experiences and words of wisdom. What would you say that we could all do as individuals, every one of us, to support women's leadership in our workplaces or political parties or community groups, and to change the culture that that has held women back? Can I start with you, Maria?
If I can find my unmute button, it's probably a lesson for us all. What can we all do? We can be positive supporters of women in leadership positions. You know, I come from a party that's had 2 female leaders, and I could say that, you know, we are the only party that's had 2 female prime ministers. But my golly, those 2 women have had incredibly difficult times when they were in those leadership positions. So when women get into leadership positions, let's support them. Let's not shoot them down. That would be what I would say.
Thanks. Heather, what do you think we could all do individually to support women's leadership?
Just before I answer that, I just think, coming back to Claire's point, and certainly within Time's Up and Me Too, I think what we have seen is that the power of the voice of women, and that once raised, you can absolutely break open systems. And so Me Too meant that one of the most powerful men in film ultimately was indicted and gone to prison. So let us not forget that the importance of amplification, that the more that we amplify some of these issues, the more we can create pressure and a movement that means that demands a response. I think in terms of encouraging women's leaders, I give many talks to senior women who often don't apply for the next job because they don't think they're up for it, they can't do it. And I always say apply. And I think what colleagues can do is encourage other women to put their names forward when they see promotions, because women often deny themselves that opportunity. They look at a job profile, they see 19 points and they can tick 18, but because they don't tick the 19th, they don't think they can put themselves forward. On the whole, men see 19 points and can tick 3 and still apply. It's just a different attitude. And I think just putting, saying to your colleague, hey, I've seen that promotion, you should go for it. Just encouraging women to put their names forward, I think is really important. And for women to have the confidence, I always say, unless you apply, you're not in the game. You have to apply. And you'll learn, even if you don't get those positions, you will learn from that experience. And that helps you have insight into what you want to do with your life and with your career.
Great, thank you. Hannah, what do you think we could all do individually to support women's leadership?
I think there are many things, and it follows on from what Maria and Heather have both said. I'm quite obsessed at the moment with the idea of sponsorship over mentorship. Mentoring is fantastic. Don't get me wrong. I have some incredible mentors myself, but I think the next step is about sponsoring. It's about going out there and saying, you know what, I know a woman who would be amazing for this. You should ask her. Because I think often we can end up putting the onus on, women saying, go for that, you should do this. And actually, we know that women often have to be asked 5 times before they will stand for a political position. And that's not taking into account women from different protected characteristic groups who often need more. And so I think there's something really important there about actually not only just saying, maybe give that a go, but actually saying, oi, you need this, get her, she's awesome, and putting people out there and making sure that you're doing this for women who aren't normally suggested, aren't normally offered up, women who don't look or sound or move like you, about finding those women and those new voices and saying, right, here's your comfort zone, let me gently pull you out of that and see what we can get you to do next. Because I know so many incredible women in our organisation who've got into politics just via that.
Great, thanks. And Claire, what do you think we should all be doing individually to support women's leadership?
I mean, my personal answer is a bit of a combination, I suppose, of Heather and Hannah, actually, in that I often make sure that I either say to women themselves, you should be pitching that story, have confidence in it, go to that editor, male or female, senior, pitch it. It's equally, if an opportunity comes up when I'm speaking to somebody really senior, put a younger female colleague forward for it. If you've spoken to them, it's an area of their interest, or something they're passionate about, the editor might not know. So I always try and do that. And I think more widely, I think it's brilliant to try and put women forward for speaking events at firms. Firms often don't necessarily think often still of their female staff first. Always make an effort to do that. Or even just calling upon female colleagues in a meeting when they might not have felt confident enough to speak up. I know it can put people on the spot, but I remember so clearly, I'm sure we all do, kind of feeling like you've got something to say and not feeling like it's the right moment to say it. So just kind of asking for people's opinions and making them feel like their voice can actually be heard and used, I think is a huge building block to giving them confidence.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. We've got some questions coming in from the Q&A now. So if it's all right, I'll move on to some of those. One that seems like a really good positive one to kind of kick off with the Q&A, especially given that we are celebrating, not trying to look too back too much. Could each panel member share one thing or one change that's happened this year that has been seen to be positive for women or girls? Maria?
Oh, well, that's easy, isn't it? It's having the first ever female vice president of the United States of America. I think that's an amazing glass ceiling that's been shattered by somebody who understands the issues that women in politics face. So I think that's a real, something really to celebrate. And, what an incredible achievement by somebody who has such talent.
Great, thanks. I did find that really exciting when that happened as well. Heather, what would you say has been a positive thing this year for women and girls?
I think the fact that we're all having this debate, I think the fact that the issue around harassment and bullying is squarely on companies and organizations' table and an agenda. I think that the voice of women, and you mentioned obviously Kamala Harris, but the voice of women, the leadership in, for example, of countries coming out of pandemics, often led by women, been amazing and an absolute, singular achievement. People like Stacey Abrams, who probably won Biden the election for the work that she did in Georgia, one of the hugely important Black women as part of the Black Lives Matter. So I think whilst we have absolutely seen challenges, I think we've seen a range of voices from women inhabiting those stages and those platforms and really taking up those causes and pushing for that change. And that is encouraging. And we shouldn't forget that, Pfizer and AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford, some of the leading scientists have been women who have saved millions of lives by the work that they've done on the vaccine. And they may not have the profile, as Maria has mentioned, but we all owe them a huge debt. And just knowing that they have played this big part in, facing into the biggest challenge we've all had as a country and as a world for many, many decades, I think underlines the fact that the empowerment of women is hugely important, and we can see some of it, and we will see more of it.
Great, thanks. Before I move on to Hannah, I'm just going to mention Maria has to leave a little early tonight, so in about 10 minutes. So if people have a burning question that they haven't yet put down on the Q&A that they desperately want to ask Maria, you've got only a few minutes to do it, so please let us know. So over to you, Hannah. What positive change do you think we've seen this year?
So this has definitely been a gendered crisis. We can go off on that one for a long time, but I think there have been positives, because I think that a lot of the work that women have done for generations is finally being recognised, whether that's around childcare, whether that's around disproportionately taking on other care responsibilities, working in nursing, working in early years, working as teachers. All of these roles have suddenly come to the fore, and I'm seeing more and more male colleagues talking about the fact they have children that they just wouldn't necessarily mention previously, but suddenly they're potentially working from home, they're potentially having to go and do this, setting up the homeschooling or whatever. They're having to work a little bit more flexibly because their partners are more likely to be out on the front line doing those jobs that cannot be done from home in an office. So I think a lot of the kind of behind the scenes work that women have taken on for so many years is finally being recognized. And I heard this great quote from Catherine Mayer recently, and she said, it's at the times of crisis that we see the most progression for women happening subsequent. That's when terrible things happen, that's when we realize the strength of women, and that's when we see progress for women. And so I'm really hoping that out of all this, out of what has been a terrible year, particularly for women, that kind of expose of what we've been getting up to for generations will finally lead to us being able to get a bit more equality in the workplace, in the home, everywhere.
I so hope you're right. That's a great way to look at it. And Claire, what would you say has been a positive thing for women and girls this year?
That was hilarious to me because I'd written down 3 things and I had to cross them off as each person said their
Yeah,
positive
next time
thing.
I'll go the other way around, I promise.
A positive thing that hasn't been said, I think, is actually well, I mean, what's been happening in the jobs market has not been terribly positive, as we know. You know, women have worked disproportionately in sectors, retail, hospitality, where jobs have been lost and will be lost. But I have been really encouraged by the statistics that have been coming out about the number of women who now want to start their own businesses and will hopefully get the support to do so. Because, you know, if we can have more female entrepreneurs in this country, the potential for the economy, and it's not just a gender issue, the potential for the economy is huge. I think the estimate was something like 250 billion added to the economy in the next 10 years, which is just incredible. And you look at, we really recently had the youngest female billionaire, which is we've all heard, the founder of Bumble, who's become a billionaire at the age of 31. I mean, if that is not inspirational, if she's not a role model, who is? So that has been something really positive and encouraging that's come out for me.
Well done on finding a fourth. Maria, we have a question that's come in, so we can grab you before you have to go. Given everything that's been discussed, especially the attention on social media for female MPs, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to a young woman who is, or a woman of any age, I suppose, who is thinking of pursuing a career in politics?
It would be to coin the phrase that was used before, I think, in some of these conversations, which is to go for it, because I think every woman has something to bring to the job of being a member of Parliament, although many of us have chosen to have a career outside of Parliament before coming in. There are many of my colleagues now in their mid-20s who are coming in as members of Parliament and add a hugely strong and diverse voice to our debates and our scrutiny of legislation. So I think that, just as has happened in the United States, going back to the comments that I made about Kamala Harris, you know, I think we can actually use the challenges that women face as a real motivation. So the abuse that women get online can be actually a real motivation to demonstrate that we have the strength and the ability to put all of that into perspective, and that what we bring to the table is so much greater than people's ability to try and shout us down. So let's use that dreadful abuse as a motivation to encourage more women to come forward to demonstrate that those people are wrong, and that abuse and those barriers that are too often put in women's way will simply serve to motivate us more.
Wonderful, thank you. We've had a question come in for Claire. Kind of looking at the media, so we've been talking a lot about how, you know, it's great that women are behind the scenes, that there's also something, you know, we need to, you know, we're working on increasing visibility for them, you know, and then that this does make the higher levels of visibility makes women more open to being abused. Do you think that there is a role for the media to do to support the use of more positive stories, languages and images, you know, and how we can carry through some of the celebration that we're having today throughout the rest of the year and into the future?
Definitely. I'm always having conversations with colleagues, both the Telegraph and other newspapers, about the language we use to report stories about women, the language we use online, you know, personally going onto my Twitter account and correcting people's headlines when I think they've done a disservice to women. I think it's incredibly important. That's actually something that I think has improved. There's still a lot of work to do, but certainly, particularly in the tabloid press. I mean, we've been having a lot of conversations this week about Caroline Flack. Of course, it's been a year since her tragic death, and we all know the horrendous headlines that preceded that, and how much that affected her. And those problems still haven't been addressed in that sector of the media. And that's going to be a really hard culture to change, I think. But certainly I know that we try and be incredibly responsible. I have very, very rare instances myself these days when I have to kind of pick a colleague up on anything. I mean, I can't even think of the last time I did, actually. But again, I think that's actually part and parcel of the fact that You know, here we've actually got, you know, got loads of female news editors. Our foreign news editor is a woman, our politics editor is a woman. So that message is sort of naturally filtered through everywhere. But we do have to be really, really careful. I mean, the way that in particular, I think a lot of us see domestic abuse cases being reported. You know, we still get terms being used like it was a crime of passion, or that the man just snapped. Or, you know, there was one recently, there have been a couple recently, you know, oh, he was really feeling the pressure of lockdown, so he murdered his wife. I mean, the way those things are still reported does really shock me. And yes, there's still a massive problem there. It's just up to us to call it out constantly.
Yes, I think I saw some of your things fixing the headline for that one, actually. Is that you fixing the headlines on Twitter for that one?
Oh, undoubtedly.
Yeah. And I have a question for Hannah. So I'm just going to read this one out. I'm a disabled woman who has muscular dystrophy. Whilst I was told to shield and this was really difficult, I have found that the way events and meetings have been moved online has really opened up being able to get involved in politics for me, as I've been able to attend meetings, etc. online. How can we make sure that we continue to enable disabled women to be involved after things start to open up?
I think that this is a hugely important question, and it's something that I've been working on quite closely, particularly over the last few months, because we've had so many women pop up and go, oh my goodness, I can actually engage. I can come to branch meetings. I can like work towards elections. I can, you know, take part. And it's not just about making things easier for disabled women. There are knock-on benefits for other women. So, you know, people who live more remotely, people who have childcare or caring responsibilities. That means they can't just drop everything and disappear off to, you know, a political party branch meeting of the evening or go and do some leafleting. Making things accessible for one group benefits so many others as well. And I really hope that opportunities like this and panels like this continue, because I think we are seeing so many more interesting voices coming to the table. So I think, yeah, there's loads that can be done, but we need to kind of keep the pressure on and every so often say, right, by all means, you know, I really miss people. I miss hugs. I miss physical contact. I miss being in the same room as people. But I think we need to make sure that there is always a combination. So if you're having a branch meeting, if you're having an event like this and it's in person, then why not also have a Zoom link? Why not also enable people to like put in questions online and run it that way? There are so many opportunities that actually, I mean, the world of medicine has been doing this for a long time, because we have so many international conferences that often we've been doing this kind of setup where you could call in or be there in person. There's a lot to learn from this. And I hope that it does make things more accessible. I think this is one area where our parliamentary system really needs to modernize. One of the most upsetting things for me as a disabled woman in politics was seeing when voting went back to being in person. And I just sat there watching the queues around this ridiculously inaccessible parliamentary building going, if I was an MP now, I would not be able to vote. I would not be able to queue. I would not be able to get up that staircase. That system is not for me. I'm getting quite emotional just thinking about it, because it is a visible barrier that says you are not welcome here, when our parliamentary system, even in a pandemic, cannot become accessible. And so I think this is the point at which we need to start making change and going, we know we can do this better. We've proven we can do this better. Let's get this working across the political system, because the current system is not good enough.
Great. Maria, I'm aware that it's exactly 6 o'clock. I was going to say 1 minute too, and then the clock switched. So I don't want you to feel that you have to sneak out. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I know you've got more things to go to in your International Women's Day.
Well, happy International Women's Day. And yes, I'm going to another Women's Day event. So, and just to remind everybody, we have a debate in the House of Commons on Thursday to mark International Women's Day. So if you're interested in hearing more about what parliamentarians think about International Women's Day, tune in.
Great. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
So Heather, there was a follow-on question from something that Claire said earlier around, I think it was Claire, talking about supporting women to run their own businesses. With your extensive experience across so many different sectors, what do you think the government could most effectively do to support women who would want to start their own business in the coming years?
That's again a very vast question. I mean, I think you both have those issues around ensuring that women feel encouraged to launch their own businesses. There is then access to capital, how they get treated by the banks, so that they can absolutely access all of the data and information that they needed. And then the sort of support systems that need to be in place for all startups, and also to ensure that there's real clarity and advice about the risks that women are taking as entrepreneurs, what they need to know. There's much more access now to support groups and chat rooms about being a women's entrepreneur, and more gatherings for women entrepreneurs. So I think it's about really accessing some of those resources, but also for the government, as it's looking to drive economic recovery, to be thinking about how it supports entrepreneurs. There's obviously some support that's gone in from the budget. But I do think it's as well making visible, these great success stories of women who have set up their own businesses, and saying, wow, look at what's just happened with Bumble, for example, and say that is, a woman who experienced sexual harassment, who took that experience and forged a whole new way of dealing with dating, which was protecting women. And that, how fantastic is that? And just, I think being inspired by those stories as a woman entrepreneur is really important, and making sure that, as I say, capital and banks are really respond to support women entrepreneurs.
Great, thanks.
Can I just add to that, Lucia? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
I just had to say, in the US, I think it's 32 years ago, they passed something called the Women's Business Act, which means, and it's not a silver bullet, but it means that in every state there are women's business hubs where women can go and get advice and support and help on how to get funding and whatever else they might need to start up their own businesses. And yes, sure, it's not a perfect solution, but we have got nothing like that over here. We're 3 decades behind. Can you imagine if we had a business hub in every city in England, in Britain? How amazing that would be.
It would sound pretty good.
That's my next campaign.
I've got one now for each of you, but I'm going to go backwards this time so Claire doesn't have to come up with 3 and cross them out. We're talking a lot about women today, and of course, what I'm hoping is that in the hundreds of people that have been here watching tonight, there are also men. Men can be feminists just as women can be feminists. It's all about interests for everybody. Gender equality is good for everyone, and it's not just about just getting support from other women. So one of the questions that came in was, how have men allies supported you throughout your career, and what would you recommend people kind of do to support if men hopefully are watching, what could they do to support women? So I'll start with you, Claire, which of course means you've got no time to think about it, but it means at least your answers won't be taken.
True. Can you hear me? Because I look on my screen, I look like I froze.
You've frozen, but I can hear you.
Okay, fine. I can hear you guys. Well, I've been incredibly fortunate in that I had 2 brilliant male mentors when I first started out in journalism, both of whom were incredibly senior, one of whom had been the editor of a national newspaper, but who just got it and helped me to amplify my voice where many others and many of my colleagues I knew weren't having that experience. So that made me incredibly confident when I was very young and really starting out, to be able to have conversations with those other senior men in the building, and not feel like I couldn't be heard and that I had to be talked over in meetings. And I'm still in close touch with one of them sadly passed away last year, but I'm still in touch with one of them, and I still turn to him for advice constantly, which I'm sure is a real pain. But I like to think that I give him some advice as well. And I think that reverse mentoring thing, especially when it comes to senior men, is really important, and something we should definitely be encouraging. And I hope he's not listening and disagreeing with me. Yes, I've been incredibly fortunate, but I would encourage anyone to not shy away from thinking a man could be their mentor and from trying to reverse mentor them as well.
Great. Hannah, what about you? What do you think on this point?
So I've also been really lucky to benefit from some incredible male mentors, and that's primarily because a lot of the senior clinicians I've worked with throughout my training the majority of senior clinicians are still men, or at least have been, and that's only now starting to change. So actually, it's been the men that have been, you know, talking about taking on care responsibilities. I mean, my first day at medical school, a guy asked me what I wanted to be. I said I wanted to be a pediatric plastics burn surgeon because it just sounded really cool. And his immediate response at the bar was, "You do realize your kids will hate you." He'd never met me before. I asked him what he wanted to do, and he's like, "Oh, I want to be an orthopedic surgeon." And I said, "You do realize your kids will hate you." And he just didn't get it, like just didn't appreciate it at all. But for every one of them, I've had amazing clinicians working with me who've gone, "Yeah, Hannah can do that. What? Of course she can do that." And like really pulling me forwards. And I'm currently working with an amazing boss who turned around the other day and said, "You know what? We don't talk about women's health enough in our practice. Come and do an hour's presentation on this on Friday. I'm inviting the whole local network." And it's just about kind of saying, right, here's an opportunity, taking it, and men doing that. And when, like, the most simple thing I think a guy can do is, if you're in a meeting and a woman in the room has not spoken by the end of that meeting, just see if there's anything she wants to say. Because often it's not that we don't have things to contribute, it's that we're being made to feel like we're not welcome, like our ideas aren't welcome, or more likely somebody's already nicked the idea that we had and claimed it as their own. So I think it's just those little things like saying, "Haven't heard anything from Hannah. Was there anything you wanted to add?" And just being that person that does that, that normalizes talking about men taking on childcare and all that sort of stuff, being that guy. Be that guy, and yeah, you've ticked my ally box for life.
Great. And Heather, what's your views on this one?
Well, I couldn't put it better than Hannah's just been talking about. I think you know, when you use the phrase ally, I mean, what does it mean? It means standing up with your women colleagues, about encouragement, about support, around not looking away when you see bad behavior and actually taking that up. It's everybody's responsibility. All of those things that go into being an ally, that's all we're asking. And women are often allies to men. They often do exactly all that support, encouragement, and all women are saying, "We would like you to do the same with us." And I think many men do that, and hopefully, as men see other men doing it, they will feel that that's also a conversation that they can also get, that they can lean into, that they can be one of those participants. But I think one of the most important elements is not to look away when you see bad behaviour, that it really matters around what you then do and how you support that person who's been subject to bullying or harassment or microaggressions.
Great. And we've probably got time for one last question. And so for everybody, the same question again. So what can you tell us about an achievement in your career of which you are most proud? And I'll start with Hannah this time, because you've been in the middle all the time.
I thought I was getting away with it then.
No.
So I started medical school running half marathons, and I graduated in a wheelchair, having had surgery halfway through and lost a younger sibling halfway through my degree. So the odds are pretty stacked against me ever qualifying. And I think the thing I'm probably most proud of is that, and turning the differences into a portfolio career, going, yes, I'm a disabled queer woman. How can I use those lived experiences to try and make things better for other people? Because I'm never going to work normally in medicine, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. So just finding those differences and turning them into opportunities that can benefit others, I think is probably it.
Great. Claire?
This is quite a tough one, especially as I banged on about my campaigns earlier. But I think one of the things I'm really proud of here actually is that when I started editing the women's section, we were the place that domestic abuse stories appeared. We were the place that sexism stories appeared, where rape statistics were reported, upskirting, everything that's gone on in the last few years. And that is now not the case at all. I have pushed these issues down everyone's throats so much and banged on about them so much that I now, I'm fighting the news desk, I'm fighting the politics desk, whatever, for these stories all the time. And actually, annoying as though that can be sometimes, I am really proud of it, because they're not being ghettoized anymore, and they're not seen as women's issues in the same way they were a few years ago. You know, they're in the mainstream news and being talked about all the time. So I'm really proud to have had a small part in that.
Great. And Heather?
I think it's about being part, I think, of this conversation and feeling that what you've been doing in your life and your career, you hope has helped to add to those changes. So, you know, I began by working at Rights of Women on sexual harassment. The Justice Equality Fund has just supported them. They provide advice to women who experience domestic violence, and they also provide advice to those women who've experienced sexual harassment. And I think being part of a movement that says this is no longer in our name, that this has to be challenged, and feeling that that movement has grown and has now, every organisation is really looking at their policies on sexual harassment and bullying, and reputationally know if they don't address them, it's going to be a serious issue. And that's because millions of women have stood up and said, this is no longer acceptable. It is time's up. And so for me, being part of this conversation and being part of this movement is something I feel I can be proud of.
Great. I know I said that was the last question, but I'm going to do one really quick one just to finish up with the three of you. And that is, can you tell me a woman leader who inspires you? Heather, we'll start with you, if that's okay.
Oh gosh, I mean, there are so many, but I think for the moment I would mention Stacey Abrams, who, as I say, was just astonishing in what she's done, and what she, you know, that we have a president in the White House, which is actually who's built on the work that Stacey Abrams did, and how she delivered Georgia, but more importantly, how she empowered so many of those voters to come out and vote. And it's just an astonishing piece of work. And yeah, I just feel inspired by her all the time.
Claire?
Well, again, a tricky question for me, because I am so fortunate that I get to meet and speak to and interview so many amazing women all the time. But what I guess what I find personally really inspiring is when women are really generous with their time to help other women, and they have the energy to do that, and nothing is too much trouble. And I'm so fortunate to know so many women like that. But a couple that really spring to mind are Pinky Lilani, who runs Women of the Future, who must be the most connected woman on the planet and has boundless energy to help connect people. And Britta Fernandez-Schmidt, who runs Women for Women International, is one of those. I mean, there's so many women like that, but they're just two that spring to mind, who just, nothing is too much trouble to help raise other women up. And I think also, if I'm being greedy and having two answers, just women who are genuine pioneers in their field. You know, last week I interviewed a woman called Holly Ridings, who probably most of you have never heard of, but she is NASA's chief flight director and the first woman to hold that job, like NASA's top woman. And she's responsible for the moon landing in 2024. So it's her job to get the first woman on the moon. And I've been thinking about that over the last few days. Whenever I've had some like minor work stress or minor problem, I've been thinking, I mean, it is nothing in comparison to that being your job and being the first woman in that role. You know, we know so much about glass cliff roles. I just think that's incredibly inspirational.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard of her. That's really exciting. And Hannah?
Okay, so the urge is to say Mandy Reid, who is my boss, but she's watching this and she'll kill me. So, hi boss. So I was going to go for Nikki Kanani. Nikki is the medical director of primary care for NHS England and NHS Improvement. And most people will know her. She's done a couple of the briefings. She's been one of the women in charge of the primary care vaccine rollout. And I've actually had like the privilege, and it is a genuine privilege, to work with Nikki pre-COVID in various committees. And she's just one of those women who makes sure everyone in the room, however junior, and I was like the most junior, has been heard from, has had their voice heard, is pulled in. You know, she will reach out to you on social media and just see how you're doing, tell you that you're doing great, even though, you know, there's a pandemic on and she's quite busy running the entirety of GP. just doesn't stop her. And she's had so much crap on social media over the last year. as a woman of colour in a prominent role during a pandemic, she has taken so much abuse on social media and yet has always responded with complete poise and just got on and done a freaking incredible job. So yeah, Nikki Kanani is just a legend in my own.
Brilliant. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, I know what you're saying, Claire, because I feel like in the time I've been at Fawcett, the number of women I've met who are just truly extraordinary. And this evening is definitely one of those evenings. So I would really like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you all so much for your insightful contributions. It really has been a genuine thrill to meet you. I know that we're not kind of in a position where I can say, let's all go out and have a coffee or something, but it's been fantastic to have this opportunity. And also thank you to all of those who Zoomed in tonight. You know, we wouldn't be able to do these things if we didn't have people who are interested in watching and asking questions and those kind of things. One of the things that has been a real learning for Fawcett this year has been this online space, you know, talking about accessibility. It has enabled us to do events like this that actually reach many more people than we would previously have done in face-to-face sessions. And so, you know, I think we hit nearly 500 or so tonight. And it's just been fantastic to celebrate with so many people and to have that reach and to know that we're not limited by location in the way that we used to be or any of the other things that would have happened. So you know, it's been fantastic, and I'm definitely keen that as we go forward at Fawcett, we will have you will continue a lot of this online working. It's brilliant. If you are interested in getting involved in politics, it's very important. We run an equal power project in partnership with a number of other organisations, including 50/50 Parliament Project, Muslims Women UK, Muslim Women's Network UK, and others. And they are offering all sorts of different training, looking at the barriers that are in place to stop women getting to politics and helping you get the skills to overcome those. And that includes things like online abuse training, but also lots of other things that are out there. So please do check out the Equal Power Project. I think that some information has been shared on the chat, but really, you know, these are free trainings. You don't have to pay anything, so do come along and get involved. It also looks at, I think it might have been Hannah who was talking about the networks, you know, having those networks of people who support you. It's a huge part of the Equal Power Project, as well as making sure that those groups are built and that people have that support to keep going, even when some of those barriers might get hit. Also, a huge thank you to the members who are here tonight, all of our members of Fawcett, who really make our campaigning and research possible. If you're not already a member, please join. There is a range of different membership options, so it doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive. It can be quite affordable. And actually what it means is that we are able to respond to the issues of the day. So when COVID hit, for example, we were one of the first organisations out there, excuse me, doing polling work and trying to find out what was going on to keep women in the spotlight and to make women visible. And that was only possible because we have the support of our members. My throat's just gone really itchy. I haven't been out of the house for a really long time, so whenever you cough, you don't want to be doing that at the moment. So please do think about joining Fawcett for membership. You also get a whole lot of really amazing membership benefits as well, including kind of hot off the press things about what's going on and other exciting offers. So I think again we're going to have that shared on the chat if it hasn't already. But we really do rely on members, so please join. So yeah, that's it for tonight. I hope everyone has a lovely evening and it continues to celebrate International Women's Day.
Yeah.
And thank you all again to our panelists for joining us. It's been fantastic.
Thank you very much, and everybody stay safe. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you. Happy International Women's Day.
Happy Feminist Christmas.